Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, kids of all ages. My name is Abby, and welcome back to episode 7 of Gregtech New Horizons. Last time, we punched through MV all the way to HV, and this time, we're going to make even more progress into HV. Starting off by making 32 HV motors, same as we did for MV and LV. The HV motors are pretty expensive in terms of gold and silver cost, but it's nothing that we can't handle, at least at this point. Plus, having 32 motors to start a tier with is always a good move. I bang out a couple of miscellaneous Thaumcraft things and make 32 MV motors. Now, these weren't necessarily as required, but our first thing we're going to make with the HV circuits that we got last episode is not an HV machine. It is, in fact, an MV machine. The MV circuit assembler, to be more specific. Circuit assemblers for each and every tier cost the tier above's circuit requirements. The LV circuit assembler took MV circuits, and the MV circuit assembler will take HV circuits. This is just going to be a constant pattern. I don't think we actually needed the advanced circuit assembler for anything in specific, but having another circuit assembler is always nice. I start making a couple of other machines. I'm working on getting a process towards getting the oil drilling rig at this point. And for that, I'm going to need a couple of other machines along with it. In this case, I make the scanner, the printer, and the seismic prospector for it. The seismic prospector needs explosives and needs to be in a loaded chunk. The quest for the seismic prospector gives us 64 powder barrels, which is more than enough. What it will do is it will take some explosives and it will circle around for a minute, and it will reveal underground ore deposits, and also, along with underground ore deposits, it will also reveal underground fluid veins. The fluid veins are the more important thing we're looking for. We're looking for a good source of oil. In this case, well, I'm just getting the process left back in order to get the underground oil vein where we have to turn it into a book and whatever. So after all that nonsense, I got myself the prospector report and finding the 9 new oil fields. It revealed a bunch of veins that we already found, but the oil is the real big deal. You see, the oil drilling rig doesn't drill physical oil out of the ground. It instead drills basically phantom oil. Now, I got a couple of oil veins, but the real big boon was the 700-liter raw oil veins that I found. Or 700L. I'm not actually sure what the L stands for. The L, however, is related to the amount of oil you pull out of the ground per tick. So the 700L is really high. It is extraordinarily high, and it is so lucky that I found that so close to my base. Additionally, because it's raw oil, and it has one of the easiest conversion ratios to diesel that there is. So I was just making all the requisite components for the oil drilling rig there. I didn't talk about, but none of it was terribly complicated. It's just more shenanigans with a bunch of different components. And I'm assembling the oil drilling rig here, and I will also now be sending the oil to my tank with a fluid pipeline rather than using trains and stuff. I'm sorry, but the trains are not that good anymore. The trains are not going to be able to keep up. So we have to switch towards more sophisticated fluid logistics. And the fluid pipeline is very sophisticated. It, in fact, has an infinite throughput rate, which is honestly kind of insane. The only issue is that it only has one input, one output. So it's not perfect, but it is really good for something like oil, obviously. I didn't really consider hooking up the fluid pipeline to the tank yet because I still have plenty of oil to process through for diesel. So I just sort of left it near to the to my tank holding my oil, but didn't actually connect it up properly yet. That'll be for later. Now it's time to start working on actually making the HV power stuff. I mean, come on, that's the whole point of this. So I set up two HV combustion generators and a 4 amp HV battery buffer. Same as just about every other tier that we've done before this, where we have two generators running into a 4 amp buffer. The large batteries are pretty expensive because they take 32 of a dust in order to fill it. In this case, it's going to take 2 stacks of lithium for 4 of the batteries. Wire it up with silver cable. Silver cable is the main cable for HV, and it's pretty much done. And I make the first HV machine, an HV macerator, which may seem like an odd choice. The appeal of the HV macerator is it has 2 output slots. This means that it can get byproducts. And as we get into higher tiers, byproducts are going to be an increasingly important part of our entire ore processing chain. Now, I'm not going to get deep into ore processing in this episode, but basically, what we're looking for is some of the things that we get are going to have very useful byproducts. And the HV macerator really allows us to start doing that. Plus, it's also just faster. Anyways, I was making some more HV circuits, and I'm making my second HV machine, which is going to be the thermal centrifuge. Something else I also need for byproducts upon byproducts. And here's an example of that. You see, HV takes a lot of gold, and one of the things that we can get from processing magnetite is gold. And we can get it in relatively large quantities. This 8 stacks of magnetite, after being all processed, I believe it was 8 stacks of magnetite ore, turned into 4 stacks of gold and 16 stacks of iron ore. That's not really that bad of a turnaround. That's what, 4 magnetite ore for 1 gold? That's pretty good. I make a couple of other machines, the wire mill and the bending machine. HV has become a big turning point because it's kind of where I just start making a bunch of machines just for the hell of it, just because they're faster. I didn't really do this with MV, not necessarily because MV is very expensive, but because the speed that I got from it just wasn't really beneficial compared to the cost of it all. But now that we can make things cheaply, it's not a problem. The advanced assembling machine is the next thing that I make. And, yeah, again, this is all just because it's much faster than using, regular LV machines. We're able to overclock twice now for most recipes, which means that it runs 4 times faster, and that's really good. Here we go with another new HV machine, the HV extruder. Again, just going for the overclocking. I spent a couple of minutes doing this, just making a bunch of new HV machines when the need arises. I also make the advanced item holder for the extruder, which was something I didn't even know existed until someone told me. It just allows you to hold molds in, like, on the side of it, which is, I mean, it's helpful, I guess. It's not a super big deal, but whatever. It's a little bit more efficient. Next, I'm able to work towards something that I've wanted for a little bit of a while, and that is the multi-smelter. It is a multi-block that is actually pretty similar to the EBF in its construction, but it's cheaper than that, and also just, well, I wouldn't say more useful, but it's just it acts as multiple furnaces running in parallel. And in this case, the multi-smelter that I make is only able to run 8 items simultaneously. So it's not significantly better than just a bunch of furnaces, but, you know, it uses really little power, as I've learned. It uses 16 EU per tick, which is very little, surprisingly. So that's nice. And it runs things through relatively quickly. So it's a nice boon to have that will help with more material processing, at least. I'll have to work with it more because I actually don't know how to get it to run more items simultaneously, but I'll figure that. I start planning out my next mode of attack with my to-do list. I don't actually get most of these things done today, but I have the plans of getting polytetrafluoroethylene, toluene, maybe taking out the Ender Dragon, and changing up the oil setup. But well, we'll see what we get to. Here I make the advanced electrolyzer for processing the massive amounts of clay that you see me having there. Again, because I'm basically just working on upgrading all of my LV machines to HV, since that works a lot better. I make another set of 32 electric motors because I already ran dry the first 32, so yeah, you can tell that clearly you use a lot here. And I make the HV chemical reactor. I hope I get better at saying that. I also make the HV centrifuge, which I am able to do because it's pretty much just the exact same components. It's just a bunch of circuits and some cables and whatnot. The circuits are somewhat expensive, but I've been able to make them in bulk. Oh, and the HV cutting machine as well, which doesn't take long at all. But yeah, the HV circuits are pretty expensive, but I've been able to make them in bulk, about 16 at a time, and that's been keeping me alright so far. I next start electrolyzing cryolite for fluorine. I start thinking about making polytetrafluoroethylene, which is a pretty involved process, but it's not too bad. So I start getting the components for that. And obviously, for PTFE, we're going to need fluorine. We're going to need that fluorine to turn into hydrofluoric acid. The only really good source of fluorine we have at the moment is from cryolite, so that's how I end up making it. And then you just combine it with hydrogen in a chemical reactor for a bit of hydrofluoric acid. The other thing we need for polytetrafluoroethylene is chloroform, I believe, but I don't really have that at the moment, so I didn't really bother with that. I also moved my my sulfuric acid setup, just to get it out of the way, because I am going to be overhauling my gases setup. And this was in preparations for that, because I was going to be using that spot on the wall instead. In preparation for my next big move, I'm going to need to switch around a couple things in my oil processing area. Namely the gaseous tanks, which I'm going to need to change their position on the wall, and I'm also going to need to make a new one. Right now I have had a hydrogen and oxygen production going pretty constantly, but now I need another one. I need nitrogen as well. Nitrogen is very, very simple to make, so it's not really anything new or complicated. All you need to do is you need to centrifuge air, and then you can get yourself nitrogen out of it. But what will be new is just simply what it's going to be used for, which we'll talk about later. What I say is that I spend the next hot couple minutes setting up the processing for nitrogen, centrifuging it out into nitrogen. The processing for nitrogen, centrifuging it out of air, getting oxygen as a byproduct, which is nice because I need oxygen for a bunch of things, but also just routing it into the super tanks to store it even better. I'm using steel fluid pipes. I switch them around eventually, I promise, but yeah. It's just a bunch of routing, it's just a bunch of shenanigananery that is kind of not super important to talk about the specifics of because it's extremely boring, but was important to do because I do need hydrogen, I need oxygen, I need nitrogen, and I need a lot of it. Once I'm finished covering up the wall and getting the whole thing looking fancy, not only do I have nitrogen being sent into a tank automatically, I also have it looking pretty snazzy, so really just good overall. I'm quite glad about it. It's also a very compact nitrogen setup, which made me very, very happy to see. What didn't make me happy to see was that I had a couple of incidents with a hyper infernal creeper that happened to spawn near to my base. Luckily, we have the power of backup, so all it was a little bit of catastrophe. And with some covering on the walls, that's automatic hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. I'm storing up nitrogen for later, but what I have now is I now am able to start working on getting the chloroform for polytetrafluoroethylene. But you didn't remember that part. Yeah, the chloroform takes a lot of chlorine to make. The polytetrafluoroethylene takes a lot of chlorine to make. I just didn't have a lot of it at the time, so I kind of took a little minute in order to actually get all of the material components required for it, and I also had to centrifuge a lot of hydrochloric acid for it too. So it was a bit of a slow process, and I wanted to do it automatically. Like just set up a processing line like for polyethylene, but I didn't really have the time to do that, so I didn't bother with it, and I just made the 24 chloroform by hand and electrolyzed the hydrochloric acid that we got out of it. And then we reacted the chloroform with the hydrofluoric acid, not hydrochloric acid that we made previously in order to get a little bit of tetrafluoroethylene. And then we polymerized that with oxygen to get polytetrafluoroethylene. Same as with polyethylene, but a little bit more complicated of a process. And it's fine though, and again, I wanted to make a dedicated processing line for this initially, like with the polyethylene, but I decided that I didn't really need a lot of it at the moment, and I could just bulk craft a bit of it and work on the polytetrafluoroethylene line at a different time, and that's exactly what I did. Now, what exactly do I need this PTFE for? Well, I need it for a large chemical reactor. The large chemical reactor we're going to use in a setup for cetane-boosted diesel. So, yes, that is the big goal. That is the big plan of this episode. It is to get cetane-boosted diesel set up. And the whole process is involved, but not too complicated. So that's why I start digging out. I start taking away the old train track and turning it into a cetane boosted diesel area. Also, after another creeper explosion in my base, I decided to stop fucking around and finally put a door on my place. So no more random monsters deciding to drop in and say hi. Anyways, we're going to get ourselves to another quick montage and then talk about the diesel. After a little bit between HV machines, we make the HV polarizer, mostly because I just got bored, and also it was ridiculously cheap to make. I also make the advanced fluid heater because I'm going to start working towards making NaC, sodium potassium. And for that, we need to heat up sodium in a fluid heater, and it only works in the MV1, not in the LV1. So then we get the sodium, and we need rock salt, and then we can combine that into sodium potassium, which then I have to contain in a 10K fluid cell. The thing I need sodium potassium for, the thing I need NaC for, is I need it for an HV energy hatch, which we won't get to until a little bit later, but there we go. So the NaC was just there because, I don't know, it was on the mind. Despite us having made the cetane boosted diesel area, we're gonna dilly-dally just a little bit. For example, I make an HV forge hammer because now I want to process things faster than I can with my LV1. And well, back to cetane boosted diesel, we're setting up the aluminum tank down here to store the raw oil. It stores 4 times as many, so this small aluminum tank will end up storing 2 million buckets of oil. Less than a super tank, but still pretty good. And I also put the distilleries in the wall, setting them up for the future processing line. Here I'm putting nickel in a bath with mercury. This will get just a little bit of platinum metal residue dust, which I'm going to want to get for platinum. I'm not going to make a proper, large amount of platinum yet. We definitely don't have the stuff for a plat line. But I do want trace amounts of platinum so that I can end up making diodes more efficiently. And back to diesel, here I am setting up the chemical reactors to turn the sulfuric light fuel and the sulfuric heavy fuel into regular light fuel and regular heavy fuel. So what this whole cetane boosted diesel area is going to be is it's going to be a more formalized diesel setup, and then it's going to be the cetanation step. And I'll get into the exact processing points of cetane boosted diesel pretty soon here. But for right now, we're just going to focus on a couple of other things. For example, getting the platinum to make the SMD diodes. So we were only able to make the surface-mounted resistors beforehand, and I think transistors, and there might have been another thing there. But now, because we have platinum, we can make SMD diodes, and they are much more efficient to make than the regular diodes. So I'm very glad that we have a recipe now, even if platinum is a little bit difficult to get. And it takes a bunch of mercury. The main way I'm getting mercury, by the way, is through cinnabar, which, yeah. It's not really a huge deal, and it also isn't terribly expensive, but it is something that we are having to do. And I get all of the constituent components for the large chemical reactor. You're going to see that I'm mainly going to be using it for one specific step in the whole entire cetane boosted diesel setup, and that will be for the nitric acid, because it allows me to turn what would be a 4 or 5 step process into one single step, which is really nice. Alright, so let's start talking cetane boosted diesel. For cetane boosted diesel, you need 2 parts. You need the fuel, which we already have, and then you need tetranitromethane. In order to get tetranitromethane, we have to react together nitric acid and ethanone. So basically, what we have to do is we have to have a setup for getting ethanone and nitric acid now, because we already got the diesel. We already got that squared in. Ethanone is fairly easy. What we have to do is we have to reduce acetic acid with a sulfuric acid. So we have plenty of sulfuric acid. In order to get acetic acid, we just have to oxidate ethylene. And we've already made ethylene processing before, plenty of times. So we basically have to recreate the ethylene processing line that we have on our polyethylene setup, and also then react the ethylene that we get from it with oxygen and then with sulfuric acid, in order to get ethanone. And then that is that finished. While working on the ethanone setup, I also make the HV mixer because, well, it's nice to have new devices, and the HV mixer is good. In this case, I specifically wanted it for energetic alloy because you need energetic alloy for the HV energy buffers, which is also something I'm making. This is because the recipe for nitric acid requires HV energy tier, and I could use two MV energy hatches, but I decide that because I'm going to be getting HV power soon, I'm going to probably just want to run it off of an HV energy hatch instead. So, yeah, might as well make it. Plus, NAC is pretty easy, and the rest of the components are also fairly easy. And here's to setting up the large chemical reactor. So before I properly got to before I started making the whole cetane boosted diesel setup in this world, I obviously started in a creative world. I started testing it out in a creative world. And originally there was this whole line that you had to do where you get nitrogen oxide and then nitrogen dioxide, and then when you get HNO3, then you get some NO as byproduct. So it was a whole mess that took forever to do, and it was going to be an absolutely wild setup. And then I learned that an LCR can turn hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. You just pump it in there, and you get nitric acid. There's no second steps. The byproduct is water, which I can just void, and it's a singular step that just turns hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen into nitric acid. Honestly, it's so easy that I felt like I was insane when I learned about it. It's just such a ridiculously easy recipe compared to the other line. So, yeah, that's why I rushed to get the LCR here. The LCR is good for other reasons too. It functions as a clean room, which means that clean room specific chemical reactor recipes can be run in that. I won't really use that here because the nitric acid recipe isn't a clean room recipe. It just takes 3 liquids as an input, so it can't be done anywhere else. So, yeah, but I mean, it is going to it expedited my sort of process really quickly for getting it. And I set up the last bit of the components. The ethanone and the nitric acid are going to react into tetranitromethane, and then the tetranitromethane is going to go into an HV mixer, which will turn it along with some fuel into cetane boosted diesel. So that is all of the physical machines set up. And here I am making some coils for an MV transformer. All the physical machines are set up for the cetane boosted diesel, so now all I had to do really was the wiring. The coils here, by the way, I need for an MV transformer because I'm going to be stepping down some power. In this case, I decided to switch my 4 MV generators on my electric blast furnace to 1 HV generator instead. So that's why I need to step down the power there. With all of the machines in, it's time to start the actual hell that is the logistics of the whole place. This takes me a couple of long time. I'm using plastic fluid pipes now instead of steel fluid pipes because I'm a smart little cookie and realized that plastic is a lot less expensive than steel. But even though now I pretty much have fluid pipes and item pipes that are free, this does not make the item logistics any bit easier. It is still an absolute nightmare to set up because you don't really have anything better. Like, Ender.io conduits would have made it very easy, but Ender.io conduits are dummy expensive, so obviously didn't want to go there. So we have to use GT item pipes and GT item and fluid pipes, and I love GT item and fluid pipes. But by God, are they hell to work with sometimes. And especially when I'm handling about 6 different fluids, yeah, it's a little bit troubling. But I make it through it. And what this thing is, so I'm pumping out hydrogen from the hydrogen super tank, and that is feeding into the chemical reactors. The chemical reactors are then taking the sulfuric light fuel and getting the hydrogen sulfide off of it, and every single bit of that hydrogen sulfide is going to be turned into dilute sulfuric acid and then turned into regular sulfuric acid. So unlike the process that I had for my original diesel setup, where I had to manually take out the hydrogen sulfide from the tanks, this will do it automatically for me, which is very nice. This is because the limiting factor was always and forever going to be the production of the light fuel and heavy fuel, the sulfuric fuels, rather than the reaction of it into hydrogen, or rather than the reaction of it into the light fuel or heavy fuel. So really, if I just have more distilleries, it's fine. So I realized that I didn't need multiple chemical reactors. So just one chemical reactor setup would be good, and then I can pipe out the hydrogen sulfide. Plus, I'm going to need a constant supply of at least some sulfuric acid for the ethanone, because that takes sulfuric acid in order to make. It produces some dilute sulfuric acid back, but that's not enough in order to circle it around again. So this setup does work. The pipes then get connected into the large chemical reactor, the hydrogen, the nitrogen, and the oxygen. It's going to be producing some, like, it's a little bit of a wasteful recipe because because it produces water as well, so it actually uses an excess of hydrogen and oxygen than it needs to. But it's so much more efficient than literally any other option. So yeah, we're going to be doing it this way, even if it is slightly inefficient. But it saves me so much time using it in a large chemical reactor, honestly. Um, and that's the main thing I need the nitrogen for. That's the main reason I set up the air centrifugation, because I needed nitrogen to make nitric acid for this whole setup. And it doesn't use a lot of nitrogen. One bucket of nitrogen makes obviously one bit of nitric acid, and one bit of nitric and 8 bits of nitric acid makes one bucket of tetranitromethane, which makes, I believe, like 500 buckets of cetane boosted diesel. It's ridiculous. The ratios are kind of insane for tetranitromethane. Anyways, what I was skipping over was me setting up the oxygen line, and then this here is the item line for ethanone, I believe. Honestly, I can't remember what all of these logistics are because it just took me so long to set this stuff up, and as you can see, there's a bunch of pipes just running throughout the walls because, yeah, that's something that I just had to do. I just had to get all of the logistics just funneled out here. And, well, it works now, but uh, it did take a little bit in order to set up all the item pipes and the fluid pipes for it. And that's not even including the electrics. Here, I'm working on making phosphorus doped silicon. What I didn't realize is that I actually need a clean room in order to cut it. So this was an entirely pointless endeavor that kind of just wasted a bunch of my time, but whatever. Now I have it for later. Yay. Yeah, we still don't have a clean room. But maybe later. Maybe one day. Definitely one day. And while I could celebrate the idea of absolutely floundering the idea of a clean room and not looking at recipes in JEI, I can start setting up the electrics, which is something I can actually be proud of still. Yeah, this thing ends up becoming a bit of a wiring nightmare because with all the item pipes and with all the fluid pipes, it's just absolute hell to actually route the cables through. But, well, I set it up for the actual diesel processing area, and then I can end up setting it up for the rest of the areas, which is its own sort of involved just mess of things. But, alright, let's talk about what cetane boosted diesel actually is. So, cetane boosted diesel, so regular diesel has an EU value of 440,000. So each bucket of diesel has 440,000 EU in it. Each bucket of cetane boosted diesel has 1 million EU in it, which is a very nice number. here I am connecting up the the oil pipeline to the actual aluminum tank, which I didn't do yet because I still wanted some fuel in my tank upstairs. But now that I'm probably going to be switching over entirely to here, now I'm able to actually do that. So yeah, so the EU value of cetane boosted diesel is about double that of regular diesel. But also, 10 buckets of diesel turns into 12 buckets of cetane boosted diesel. No way, I think I got that wrong actually. Ignore me, I totally said that entirely incorrectly. And cetane boosted diesel only takes 20 millibuckets of nitromethane in order to make one bucket of cetane boosted diesel. So for every bucket of nitromethane we can make 50 million EU worth of cetane boosted diesel, which is kind of insane. We can turn what it'd be about not even 44 million. It'd be about like 20 million into 50 million EU. So we can not only about double our EU capacity, but also because of the specific setup that I have here, it's more expandable than what I had previously. Because if I just set up more distilleries, then I'm going to be getting fuel faster. And what you're going to see inevitably is that fuel is my bottleneck when it comes to cetane boosted diesel production. Additionally, another good thing about cetane boosted diesel is that it works as a tier 1 rocket fuel. So I don't need to bother with any bit of pyroless oven processing. I can just use cetane boosted diesel for the rocket. And we're still quite a ways away from the rocket, but well, with the amount of diesel you're going to see that we're going to get, we're not going to have any troubles once we actually get to the rocket. Yeah. I skipped over it while I was doing it because I was busy talking, but here I am setting up all the sort of specifics of the outputs, all the logistics, turning the acetic acid into the ethanone, and also I realized that this MV chemical reactor needs a battery in order for it to work, but it's not really a big deal. Yeah, so there's the ethanone being made. Diesel has already been started to be made because of the setup. So once I put in the power for that thing, then there we go. Diesel is being made automatically down here. And really the rest of it is just making sure that cetane boosted diesel is made. So that takes the ethanone, and then I set up the power for the sulfuric acid processing area, and all that. So there's the power for sulfuric acid processing. It's really just identical to what it was the other previous 2 times. But now we have automatic supply of hydrogen sulfide and even some dilute sulfuric acid from it. And then the power supply to the large chemical reactor. In this case, I have 2 HV combustion generators here. One of them is supplying the chemical reactor on its own, and the other one is working to supply the mixer and the chemical reactor required to get the cetane boosted diesel from it. Again, something that I'm considering is maybe setting up specific electrolyzers that would void hydrogen and be dedicated only to making oxygen, because we need oxygen for a lot. It allows us to make stainless steel. It also is going to be required, obviously, for nitric acid. And this whole process takes 150,000-ish EU, but it's not really that bad of a deal. So, yeah, I've been considering making oxygen-specific electrolyzers, and I might do that. You'll see if I do that. But there we are. So there's water, we got nitric acid. It is lovely. The whole thing is complete. Also, nitric acid is useful for plenty of other processes later. It's a very useful thing, and I'm probably going to have more chemical reactors dedicated to it. I also finally switch out the device powering the oil drilling rig from a battery buffer to a combustion generator. I have no idea why I didn't do this before. It has been an intense pain in the ass in order to get it to actually work with just the battery buffer. And fuel is way more power efficient than batteries. So I don't know why I was doing that for so long. But, well, now it's done. And I don't need to worry about it anymore. And there we have our first bits of tetranitromethane being made after reacting ethanone and nitric acid together. This is pretty much the tail end of the production line. We have ethanone automated. We have nitric acid automated. The tetranitroethane is being made. All that's left is to boost our diesel with it, I guess. In this case, I have to use literal fluid cells, so I just cycle them between this tank that is being fed by the diesel super tank that we already have. So with that, and with a bit of conveyor belt cycling, the whole thing is finished, and we get our first bits of cetane boosted diesel out, which is nice. There we go. It's kind of finished. All I have to do is I have to route up the diesel through the whole area in order to actually power the generators, and it's done completely. There it is. Our first bits of cetane boosted diesel and a new power source. The power source for most certainly the rest of HV, period. Whether we're going to be keeping cetane boosted diesel for EV and later on is still up in the air, but EV is so far away that honestly it's not worth thinking about. But here I am doing the last little steps, making sure to collect all the little bits of diesel I can and covering all the walls to make sure that it looks nice and pretty, this area. Scrounging the last bits of diesel from the pipelines, and it's going to take a while for cetane boosted diesel to really go out through all the channels, but it'll get there eventually. Most certainly it'll get there eventually. It's a job. It's going to do it. And there we have it. It's all set up. It's all working automatically, and we are getting hundreds of thousands of buckets of this stuff, which translates to millions and millions of EU just sitting and waiting for its time to shine. And I can finally get rid of that sight in the wall and start thinking about what else to put there. I honestly don't know what I'm going to put there, if anything. I have not even thought remotely about that. And, well, unfortunately, I didn't get everything I wanted to get done in this episode. I wanted to get toluene, I wanted to get styrene butadiene, I wanted to get all that. But we couldn't. It just wasn't feasible. Cetane boosted diesel is not a small accomplishment at all. I was going to need to get it done eventually, and, well, it just happened to be here. But what we're going to use with all of our new power, all of those new tools, and with every little thing that we got going out of HV, is going to be a question for next time.